Hi, I wanted to make you a quick video since you missed class, the first day of class. So I have these slides in the email to you, but I wanted to go through just very briefly what we went through in class so you understand how to kind of think about the slides. So first, these are the three texts we are going to be using. You need to have Kindred by Wednesday, which is a graphic novel. If you have an Emoja, if you're with the Emoja program, there's a voucher for you at the bookstore. Unless you just added, then you might have to wait a couple days. And so we are going to start today, or what we did yesterday in class, with slave narratives and talking about racial stereotypes that have persisted that came from slavery, and then kind of talking about some of the ways we've started to break out of those. So we did a little icebreaker that was a little chaotic, but by birth date, and people just sort of got to know each other a little bit. The basic details, if you've had me before, my phone number and email and all of that is still the same. We meet Monday, Wednesday in 3304 for an hour and 50 minutes with a 10-minute break in the middle. Please be on time. There's going to be quizzes every Monday starting week 2 through week 10 on the reading from that previous week. There'll also be discussion questions that you can use as a guide for your quizzes. Do know we have 4 units. We're going to do one on the graphic novel, one on poetry and music, one on the novel, and then a screenplay film, and then there's a research project. There are some days we have holidays where we don't have class, and we have an on-campus event Wednesday, February 6th that where we won't be in class, but we will be on campus. So we're going to be really looking at how new identities and new forms of text were created from African Americans through the struggles being faced from time of slavery till now. And so, like I said, these are the major assignments. And so then we dug into slave narratives. We talked a little bit about how many there are. There's a link here with a catalog of hundreds of them. Some of the famous ones, the Solomon Northup is 12 Years a Slave story, you probably know. Frederick Douglass is often taught in high school. This is a really nice photograph of a former slave who had been freed, who was a nurse. And one of the things about the slave narratives is oftentimes, because it was against the law to teach slaves to read, then sorry, that's my dog. The slaves had to tell it to a third person, so it was a third person writing it. And one of the differences is with Harriet Jacobs, so it's just who we're going to read. She wrote it herself because she was taught to read and write. Her story you'll get to read about here in the bullets, but mainly here you'll get her story. So you want to watch this video. It's about 15 minutes long. Morgan Freeman narrates it. It's pretty nice. There is a place in North Carolina where you can learn more about her as well if you ever go there in person. And after she becomes free, she actually gives back to her community, even despite everything she's gone through. So students really liked this video. They were really into it. They had never heard of her before, and they're pretty shocked by her story. So then we dug into the racial stereotypes of the time. We took a break and then we did this. We talked about the 4 types and how they're persisting now. This was from a picture from Gone with the Wind, which was the type of the mammy or the black servant in the house, and who was often used as comic relief. And comic was the first one we talk about. Played on a lot of negative stereotypes and assumptions, and the other idea about this was like the Uncle Tom, creating an Uncle Tom character where a black character is overly sympathetic to whites. Modern examples of this, some movies. These movies, though, featuring African Americans, were produced and supported financially by white men. And so a movie that kind of really examines that was Bamboozled. This is also like the reason Dave Chappelle and others have just decided, like, I'm not going to put on a wig and dress anymore. I'm not going to do whiteface. I'm not going to do these silly things that really perpetuate stereotypes. The pathetic was the idea about not being unable to learn or to think. This is a newspaper drawing of blacks moving north after being freed, and the Northerners still referred to them as contraband, like not even human beings, like stolen goods in this article. This was just an article that was a little excerpt of a sermon actually that was given to give you the date, and that's what the only reason I'm showing you this is 1817. At that point, there was this idea that was trying to be perpetuated that African Americans were not a human species. And there's a book here. Well, so it went into this idea of craniometry, which was a pseudoscience where they tried to measure the skull and to use that as a form to kind of show African Americans were closer to apes, which was all obviously totally refuted in 1859 during the Origin of Species. But that's a 40-year period where there was a lot of horrible violence against African Americans during that time. So another one that spent a lot of time conflating African American with the God story or with like biblical texts, and it tried to say that the reason Jesus came was to save the world from black people integrating with whites. And this guy made, a bunch of money selling this book and trying to perpetuating this. His name was Charles Carroll. And so that goes along with this idea of the grotesque and animalistic. We also often think like, wow, how could this happen? But there's still hints of it that are in we'll see in a few minutes about today. Right after this was an article about the Nat Turner uprising. And after that happened, the violence against African Americans worsened terribly. In between 1877 and 1951, 4,400 African American men, women, and children were hanged, burned alive, drowned, shot, beaten to death, and most often without consequence, primarily in the South. This is a picture from Birth of a Nation, film in 1915 that was shown in the White House and celebrated. It had a white man playing a black character in blackface, and it showed his killing by the KKK, and it revived the KKK. Like I was saying, this animalistic stereotype hasn't gone away in all ways. We see this in imagery that is sometimes purposely perpetuated. You might have seen this ad, the H&M ad. I didn't put it on here, but this one with the coolest monkey in the jungle, the white kid in this ad was the king of the jungle. He was the lion. So it like really perpetuated some problematic imagery. We talked about minstrel shows and how it was a white sort of form of entertainment that was perpetuated by poor whites who wanted to fight the economic oppression. So they started kind of making fun of and attacking blacks as a way and making money off codifying sort of whiteness by creating legal sort of definitions of whiteness, and it helped them financially eventually, but primarily helped them racially. We showed an example of blackface entertainment using white actors and how they would perpetuate stereotypes. It was pretty terrible. This was done in the 30s and 40s a lot. But it hasn't all gone away, and like I said before, and this was a couple, even the last 20 years, you get like even though Peele is doing much better work now, get the Key and Peele stuff, the Tyler Perry movies, and it really perpetuates this like coonery idea, this minstrel idea of you being a form of entertainment rather than being fully developed human beings. So breaking the stereotypes, we watched This Is America, and we kind of showed some of how his behavior and movements and choreography matches the original idea of Jim Crow, and perpetuating this view of acting black, performing blackness, and why that is often seen as a distraction to the real violence and poverty and the things that are going on in the background. Other examples, Atlanta, Peele's movies like Get Out and Us really have started new forms, and that's our whole goal here, is looking at new forms of creating black stories that center black folks and told by black people. We also have new movies, fairly new movies about slavery that really capture the stories in a more complex and nuanced way, and giving characters and African Americans agency. New books, obviously there's books been written since even slave time by African Americans, but now we have black publishing houses, movie books and stories being told and published and financially benefited from by African Americans, which is what we need. So the reading that you're going to be doing is we're going to be reading Harriet Jacobs' autobiography, portions of it. So there are 36 little sections of her book, but we're just going to read these 11 that are listed here. If you click on this link, you will see, and you have the slides, you will see the whole book in online form. So you just have to read those sections, and you'll see online, if you look in Canvas, there are discussion questions due on the 13th, but we're going to talk about them in class on Wednesday that relate to this. So this is something you can get caught up on right now. The Octavia Butler, the graphic novel we're going to read, deals also with slavery and modern times. It's a sci-fi one, and I'm going to start talking about it on Wednesday, and you're going to read it over the weekend. Start reading it. So your homework is to review the shell and the syllabus. Contact me with any questions. The shell isn't fully published, but the assignments are now. Read the listed sort of chapters, and then start the discussion questions. We'll review them in class, and then there's a quiz next Monday, so you got to get started on it, okay? If you have questions, let me know. Otherwise, I look forward to seeing you tomorrow.